All right, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:30 on the dot, and we have a long agenda. Not this agenda, but our next or our regular agenda. So I'm going to call our work session to order and welcome Ms. Posey, Dr. Crane, Dr. Robinson to discuss policy 6800 student activities.
So we're bringing policy 6800 student activities to you today. This is our existing policy. It resides in what we call the old manual, but it is the policy that addresses student activities and includes the language regarding outside agencies or groups establishing and sponsoring clubs and organizations on campus. The revision that we are recommending for policy is very minor, and it is in the last paragraph at the very end of the policy. And I'll read that section and specify what we added. Clubs and organizations established and sponsored by outside agencies or groups shall not be considered school clubs and shall not function on school grounds or during the school day unless authorized by the principal. And we have added, or we recommend adding as a revision, as specified in 6800 RMP. Ms. Posey is going to walk us through that RMP. It is a new section C, which addresses how this will happen. We have placed the policy revision on the action agenda tonight, and we'll request a waiver of second reading so that this revision is effective, well, as of tonight, should the board vote to approve. Ms. Posey?
All right, thank you very much. So the 6800 RMP student activities, we revised the purpose statement so that you can see that we've incorporated in there our outside organizations or groups. We provided a little definition chart in there about what is a student activity, what is an outside organization or group. And then when we were here last in October, we talked about incorporating the memorandum of agreement, which would help cover the activities that the student organization or group would be providing, and it would also allow us that layer of insurance protection with the certificate of insurance. And so that's really what we're bringing forward today as a recommendation in our RMP. So in section C, you'll see a section on clubs and organizations established and sponsored by outside agencies or groups. And this section really covers the principal still must approve the activity. So to be a school-related activity, the principal needs to approve that activity. So it does provide in here that no outside organization or group may provide student activities without the prior written approval of the school principal. And then in determining whether or not to approve a proposed activity, the principal shall consider, and this is really about the safety of our students and also alignment with instructional or educational mission of the school or district, student safety and supervision, compliance with district policies and regulations, and operational feasibility and scheduling considerations. So that kind of just helps give some guiding principles. Principles. Was there a question? Okay.
I sneezed.
Sorry. The memorandum of agreement, this is the board-approved template that we currently have established. The board attorneys help us revise those agreements, but a memorandum of agreement would cover what is the purpose, what is being provided, what's the responsibility of the school system, what's the responsibility of the outside organization or group. It would also set the requirements related to interactions with our students. So we have the required background checks, so if they are going to be in a one-on-one or even in a group setting with our students, we do require the criminal background checks, sexual offender registry, and any other appropriate screening as required by law. We also have the insurance requirements where the general liability would be on the outside organization or group, so they must carry that general liability. They must carry workers' compensation if it's applicable under the law. as well as other, depending on what type of services this group is providing. We do have requirements for sexual molestation and abuse coverage, and then any additional insurance required as we have in our risk management guidelines or applicable by law. We have termination clauses as well if parties do not follow the MOA. And then we have a process for review of the MOA to make sure that we have a full scope of not only the school principal, the area superintendent, the chief officer would be our chief of staff, risk management and the finance officer, and of course the provider must agree to all of those terms and conditions. Would you like me to continue going through these, or have you all had an opportunity to review, and do you have some questions?
Sure. How much, I guess let's do before I do this sometimes, and then we can open up for questions.
Okay, all right. So we also have implementation and ongoing compliance. So basically, once that MOA is executed, the responsibilities of both parties in maintaining the agreed upon terms in the MOA. And then, as I mentioned, we have an enforcement. So anyone who fails to comply with the terms, there could be immediate suspension or termination of the activity. We could revoke permission for that outside organization or group to do this, to conduct business on the school system, and then additionally corrective actions as permitted by policy or law.
Thank you, Ms. Posey. I saw, and I have a comment, but I'll wait and go around. So I saw Dr. Joe, Ms. Caulfield, and then Ms. Rice.
What happens if a principal approves an organization to come in that other principals have not? Like if I'm thinking of like Turning Point USA and the schools who have allowed it versus not, what happens in those situations?
So I shared with you that there's a series of individuals. So a principal might approve the activity, but when entering into the MOA, there would be several individuals within the organization that approve that. So item C3, you have the school principal is basically initiating it. So they've approved it and they've entered into an MOA, and it goes through a routing process for approvals. So to maintain consistency, we're relying on area superintendents and the overseeing chief officer, which would be chief of staff, to be maintaining those types of, I guess you would say, compliance and standards across.
But I just want to make sure that I understand the question as well.
And I just wanted to chime in, but I think those two are two separate entities. We're talking about student clubs like the NICA Club, which is a cycling club that's been before us. And with this policy change, those students would now be able to have that bike club. What you're representing, Dr. Jobe, is a student organization that is a different, that's something totally different. And that would just require a advisor at the level, and there's a different process for that. So
Even if it's using the overriding organization, like even if they're working with the national organization?
So I'm not sure what...
You have to have a faculty sponsor of a student club organization. And so what we're talking about in this particular instance is outside organizations coming into school to provide services.
that has their insurance and everything else. It was just, but for an example, with the NICA Club, that I know Ms. Caulfield and Dr. Ing and I have been hearing from and working with, they had everything. It was just there was some roadblocks with this policy language. So this is going to allow those clubs that have their insurance, have the MOU to be able to participate on our schools. Hopefully that helped clarify a little. Ms. Caulfield?
Thank you. To be clear, on Dr. Jobe's answer or question, it does say on item C, clubs and organizations established. It does sound like it would fit what the question said. But that wasn't my question.
I was just going back to my high school experience when I sponsored clubs, that you have to have that. So that's the lens I was coming from with it.
Okay. But I'm just saying, somebody might read that it would pertain here. And I did have NICA and the skate clubs in mind when I was going through this policy. My question was, and I think it's on number 3, is this, they must be routed and approved through all of those levels?
That is our current standard practice, yes. I review every MOA and every contract. In addition to the chiefs do approve, as well as the area superintendent or assistant superintendent, depending on the level, yes.
So is this policy more for something that is on a bigger organizational scale? Because like if you have a club or something that comes in, them to have to go through 6 layers of people to say that whether they could have this club or this activity in the school, it just, I don't know, that seems like it's a whole lot of bureaucratic, like, process that they have to go through.
And I know with the NICA Club in particular, they have everything. It was just this MOU was the only thing, and the way the policy was written was the only thing that was stopping them from being able to fully participate legally on campus.
Okay, so if I can just follow up with, my question was, when you said, I was going to ask, does the principal have a certain criteria in order for them to approve to go to the next level?
I believe that would need to come out of the chief of staff and the
Right.
area superintendent's area.
Can you ask that question one more time, please?
So I'm just trying, one of the challenges that when the NICA clubs came to us, one of the challenges they had was, and I'm not trying to throw anybody on the bus, I'm just giving an example for this policy, but the principal was not exactly sure they wanted that activity, like the skate clubs, for example. So then it stops there. Is there any criteria that would allow the students who apply to say, look, we've checked all of these boxes and we would like you to consider that?
So I understand exactly what you're asking. So if you have a situation in which the principal of the school was presented an opportunity to have an organization on a particular campus, and for whatever reason, they don't support it.
Right.
And so you're asking, is there a appeal process, or what can we do, or things of that nature, to at least have another voice or an opportunity for this program to be afforded on that campus? So in that situation, they would then go directly to the area superintendent and have a conversation with the area superintendent, and then there would be additional conversations, because one of the things that I would ask is to really understand why they would not support it. What are the barriers in place? Are there specific challenges that would be created as a result of having this opportunity on campus? All campuses are different, all facilities are different, and so there will be some nuances that you would have to be able to uncover in order to find out the what, when, where, why. With the understanding, we want to do everything that we can to support children and give them opportunities to engage in many different modalities and opportunities for participation. So there would have to be an additional conversation. However, the principal does have the overriding authority with regards to whether or not they want to have a particular program on that campus, according to policy.
Yeah. I just have, I struggle with that.
And so I think the difference here is that generally principals have that authority to approve or disapprove of a club. With this particular one, we still know that there were some issues around the insurance piece and whether they could or could not. And I know the principal has shared with me that those things that they could do to have the club at that particular time, the parameters that we had set in place, that's what he was adhering to, but it was the full breadth of what we wanted to do that. He wasn't sure that we could do from the insurance purposes. That's what we've been able to do, is to remove those barriers so that the club, as they want it to exist and as we can support it through insurance, now there's no barrier to that. Now, having said that, again, that would be the same process. The principal, according to our policy, can approve. But as Dr. Robinson has said, we don't want to have a practice of the principal standing in the schoolhouse door simply because he can. And that is where you have an area superintendent, a chief, a superintendent, and a school board. All of those are things that we would want to be able to leverage to say, give us a good, clear rationale of why you don't want this club to exist. And so that kind of speaks to what Dr. Joe was talking about in terms of other clubs that may have an opinion that's different from someone else. but principals can't discriminate. They have to say that whether I like or dislike the position of this club in the national organization, as long as they've done these things and don't violate these policies, then we want to give them the same opportunity as anybody else. And so in these situations, principals, we do still want them to have the ability to approve and disapprove, but we clearly laid out what we want those parameters to be, and there is oversight to that. So.
But as it relates to the bike club and skate club, I just want to make sure we're germane to this, because the policy is only touching this aspect. The other piece of the policies will be fleshed out and will go forward to the policy committee. But this is just to make sure that the bike clubs, skate clubs, and any of those other clubs that has been temporarily paused because of insurance purposes and risk management will now be able to go through with this. I just wanted to keep us.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that we opened up that possibility and continued to talk about the insurance and see how we can make that work. I was just curious, like, do we have that equal opportunity at each school to now do that with this policy the way it's written? So that's what my concern was.
I think the great thing, as Ms. Johnson-Hoskins reminded us, the great thing about policy, we can always do an assessment, figure it out. If there are some things that we're not hearing that's working, we can always revamp the policy with accurate data to determine where it needs to be tweaked and go from there. But I understand what you're saying, Ms. Caulfield. I had Ms. Rice and then Dr. Ng.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions for me for clarity. Can you share just, I think I'm hearing correctly, the intent of the changes in this policy or the R&P that we created to bring clarity so that other programs can participate in organizations? I do still have the same questions that Ms. Coco had around making sure the language is correct with organizations versus the two differences, versus clubs, because different people interpret our R&P in different ways, so I want to make sure that there is definitely a clear distinction between the two. And then the other part for me is I kind of feel in the same space as Ms. Cofield around, while I hear what our chair brought a whole lot of clarity for us about understanding taking away the barrier, but I feel like we took away the barrier and then increased more actions to take to actually participate. So that goes back to my original question of our intent, to help me understand the intent a little bit more. That it says, is this really about larger organizational clubs who can actually afford these particular pieces? Are we trying to limit to a way? And I don't know if we can actually answer this right now in session. I can get an email or something, but I think I'm making sense.
Jessica, if you could scroll up to the original policy, 6800, it's at the top of that. So the paragraph that Dr. Crane read is, and it does state clubs. Jessica, if you'll go up just a little bit more, it's that very last paragraph. It says clubs and organizations established and sponsored by outside agencies or groups shall not be considered school clubs and shall not function on school grounds or during the school day unless authorized by the principal. So using that language, having not been in a school, clubs and organizations was something that I folded into the R&P. If you'd like for clarity to separate those, I'm happy to make revisions to the R&P, but I was going off the basic language in the current policy that stated clubs and organizations.
Right, so thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. And so it does bring me back to the same thought process that my other colleague was in, because if they are separate based off what Dr. Jobe was trying to express or ask, then I think that if the intent of this policy is specifically around organizations and not clubs, we need to be specific in nature of indicating it, so that our principals are not confused while trying their very best to comply with policy, right? And so that there's no
confusion
I
for
do
me.
believe the ask was a bike club. So I think some of our terminology may need to be cleaned up because what came to risk management was a request for a bike club sponsored by this outside organization. And so to me, and I'm a math person, so I'm happy to wordsmith what we need to wordsmith along with the assistance.
And that may be
Right.
definitions within this policy so that our staff, my concern is staff tries to comply as best as they can. That's my thought process. And the intent of me asking these questions is because I'm thinking about them trying to meet the needs of the families and of students while still trying to obey district policies and intents. And so that's what my line of question is honestly about.
Certainly. And I do want to clarify, the review process, while it does list out a number of individuals, we use DocuSign for our internal routing. It is a quick and clean approval process. It is not something that is passed around on paper, and so it does not add to that. What it does is it protects and reduces and mitigates risk and exposure of the district. And so risk management reviews it to make sure that the insurance coverages are in compliance with what's in the MOA, the board-approved templates. I review it to make sure that there's not a cost implication that we're agreeing to. In some cases, in MOA, it's not supposed to be costing the district anything, but if there's a monetary value that someone's inserted in there, I do need to review it for that purpose. And it moves rather quickly between the administrative services group because we all see it at the same time. So we receive it all at once, and as soon as each one of us approve it, it moves to the next level. So it is not a lengthy process to do that once it gets into our DocuSign routing.
Thank you for sharing that for my clarity. And the only reason I'm asking to make sure that I'm getting it because you're asking us to vote today. And so before I vote today about what we have, I want to make sure that I am agreeing to what we're voting for. I understand criminal background checks. I understand sexual registry checks. I mean, that is for the people who are participating, adults that are participating in the programs, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so the other part is there's a specific amount of money, and then how, and I know our risk management is really about helping us minimize the risk, but my observation has been sometimes risk management can push programs completely right on out the door. And so I'm trying to determine how well are we able to, and I'm not talking about the programs in which they've mentioned, because I know nothing about what was trying to happen. My view is for programming now and what's to come. How are we assessing, Dr. Taylor, that yes, we need risk management to do what risk management does, but I've seen risk management, even with us as a board, has completely wiped things off the table for us to do that, in generally speaking, is possible, but like, how do we mitigate some of that?
So that is the exact question to ask, and I think that is what this entire board, district, and schools have grappled with, is to what degree do we take on risk. And so with risk management, their responsibility is to simply talk about what is that level of risk, what they recommend. In many cases, if those things don't end up in front of the superintendent or in front of the board, then we may never know anything about it. And risk management just says, sorry, you can't have a bounce house, you can't do this, that, or the other thing. And so this is, I think, a clear example where the board has said, while there may be some things that are not in place, we are willing to pay that added insurance cost and take on that extra risk that I think everybody has talked about. And that's really what we have to mitigate is what level of risk is the board willing to take. And that's what we rely on risk management to do. And so part of this has been to say risk management does not make the final decision, that it is up to the superintendent and the board to talk about what level of risk that is. Now, Rod, I know you kind of dealt with that a lot in terms of risk management and what you've seen. I'll give you an opportunity to kind of add your thoughts to it if you will. But that is the essential question, Ms. Rice, is you as a board and I as a superintendent have to think very deeply about what is the level of risk that we take, because regardless of what we put in place, I don't think we remove all risk.
And I just, the last thing, while you comment with that, the last thing I have is, what is the minimal trend amount that you typically ask people to have in this, in these contracts of coverage? Like, for instance, of insurance, right? Because that also creates barriers depending on what type of program it is. So what is the minimum risk? My firm, my minimum risk is $1 million. That's the standard, right?
Yes.
But what is Wake asking for as a minimum that can possibly create a barrier with, or so what's the trend that you're seeing, or what is the bottom line of what Wake says?
It is a million for general liability.
$1 million. Are there any other insurances that you ask us to have that's over $1 million?
It depends. For this particular MOA, it would be the $1 million. We do have other levels for other contract type of services, like transporting our children is higher.
Okay. So can you give me the range of what that looks like? So we start at $1 million and it can go up to right now, what's the highest we have right now?
I believe it's either 3 or 4 million.
Okay.
5 million?
Fine, that's
$5 million.
fine. I was looking for that number. I asked questions that I might know the answer to, but want the public to know.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, thank you. That's it. Thank you,
So I
Chief.
have Dr. Ng, and then Ms. Gordon, and then, okay, then I'll go back to Mr. Haggerty, and then Ms. Kaufman. So we'll go in that order. Dr. Ng, and then Ms. Gordon.
Thank you. And I agree in spirit with this, the RMP. I think kind of have to think back to kind of like the origin of this and what is the intent of this. I mean, it was because this organization, this group of students wanted to do something, but in a sense was not able to do it because of the risk involved, and therefore they were able to, took the initiative to bring in a overarching organization that was able to take on some of that risk, and therefore this came about, right? That was my understanding. And so, I mean, it's a very narrow circumstances with which this RMP, this particular MOA stipulation will be applied in the future. But I'm glad that we have something as a template for the future for these kind of situations. I mean, if somebody wanted to do a hang gliding club, by all means, if they can do a hang gliding organization to bring in and reduce the risk on the school system, you know, by all means. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Ng, and I agree. As long as they follow the policy, have their insurance and MOU, we will welcome that club too. So, thank you, Dr. Ng. Ms. Gordon.
Thank you. My question is around the review, the MOA review and approval process. So just for clarity, I heard you say that these are the entities that it has to go through in order to ultimately get approved. But if it stops at the school principal, if a principal denies it, does it still go through this process, or it just stops?
Stops at the school level.
That's what I had a problem. Okay.
I wrote it down. Go for it.
I would share with you that all principals want students to be connected to schools, and they exhaust every effort to provide opportunities to do that. If there's ever a situation in which you know of a situation where something that is good for children and you feel as though that there's a barrier in place, and Dr. Taylor mentioned it earlier, that's our opportunity to have a conversation and work through the nuances to ensure that we can provide support.
But we would have to know, like we would have the public or students or parents would have to bring that forth to say, this was denied for these reasons, we feel like X, Y, Z.
Right, and there's been situations where that's happened.
Which goes back to the skate club. The skate club, the bike club were two particular instances that were blocked because of this. And so this is a way of fixing that problem. But I think what I'm hearing is some of the hang up is just around the term clubs. And there's a difference between a school club, which does not necessarily need to go through all of this, versus an outside org like NICA or a skate club that is housing students through their organization,
Right.
but they're Wake County School students that are trying to participate on campus. That's where the hiccup was with those two instances. So for a school club, like a student council, a chess club, this policy, if I understand this correctly, does not necessarily apply to those school-sponsored clubs. This policy is for outside organizations that students are trying to bring on campus.
Okay.
And a significant difference is the outside organization is facilitating, orchestrating, and in charge of the activities on campus. That's different than our policy 6801, which is student-initiated, non-curriculum related student groups, which include things like FCA, where there may be a faculty sponsor, but this policy specifically says that school employees shall not promote, lead, or participate in these meetings of these non-curricular student groups. They can be present to observe, maintain order, protect general welfare of students. And in addition, it also says non-school persons may not direct, conduct, control, or regularly attend those groups' meetings, right? So at an FCA meeting, that is the students organize, orchestrate, lead, carry out. I'm aware of a group at a high school, Women's Health, since an O and an A, and students run, there is a faculty advisor there, but the faculty advisor does not, it's just to observe, guide, should be needed, and this policy specifically says in the beginning that they shall be permitted to conduct voluntary meetings during non-instructional time when other non-curriculum groups are permitted to meet, regardless of the size of the group or the religious, political, philosophical, or other content of the speech at the meetings, provided that they don't materially and substantially interfere with orderly conduct at the school. And such meetings shall be open to all students with regard to race, color, religion, and national origin. This is the student one. It's a completely different thing if the outside organization is conducting, facilitating, and responsible for the activity.
And can you just say what the FCA is?
FCA is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. They meet on, I think, a lot of our school campuses at various levels, and that is a student-initiated, non-curriculum group. That is not an outside organization organizing and carrying forth those activities on campus.
And once this policy is approved, there will be some memo that goes out to principals to say that, hey, bike clubs such as this example are now permissible on campus as long as you follow this process. So therefore, there is no, one school is doing something differently and another school is doing something differently. And I think with the students that have brought this to our attention, will definitely keep us abreast of if there's something that is not going the way the policy should indicate. So, Mr. Haggerty?
Yeah, thank you. So, there's a lot with student clubs where we could be talking about this topic all day. And the chair had mentioned to me, but I just want to ask it so that everyone can hear. We'll have another opportunity to bring this policy back to policy committee to look at things that aren't necessarily in this language. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, because like the point that Dr. Crane just raised, like the difference between these organizations and the student-led organizations, in our student-led policy, we have that language about non-discrimination, whereas here in this policy, we don't. specifically.
But we do have the language at the very front of the RMP that says activities must support the district's educational, protect student safety, comply with all applicable policies.
But I guess what I'm getting at is that if we've got one policy that specifically targets it and one that just says, well, we're going to follow other policies, we might want to just look at the two and sort of standardize them and make them uniform, right? So from that point of view, I have a lot of things that I would question or ask about this one. But if you're telling me that, we're going to have an opportunity to look at those in policy, I can defer all those and just focus on this MOU stuff.
Yes, so therefore we can get the bike clubs together. So if students want to begin this process and get things moving for the next academic school year, they have the roadmap and the green light to move forward, then anything else can come before that. So today's purpose was just to make sure those bike clubs and the skate clubs and any other particular outside organization that we're trying to do work with our students could move forward and start that process before the end of the school year and gearing up for the next school year.
Thank you.
Policy Chair Edmonds, I'll recognize you.
No, clearly we need more discussion to distinguish between 6800 and 6801, the two policies, and I welcome that discussion. I mean, I've got some questions myself, but I'm comfortable tabling that to the policy committee.
So I'll go to the next round of questions, and we have about 10-ish minutes, 9 minutes, so I'll start with Ms. Caulfield, and then we'll go to Ms. Rice.
Okay, thank you. So back to the policy, and I'm just really struggling with, if the principal says it's okay, then they could go forward to the next step and follow these rules. Two things. We're saying that this is okay, and this is great. I appreciate that we're doing this and we're moving the NICA club forward and keeping that in mind. The skate clubs are not an organization. The skate club was going to be something that was more student-led. They didn't have like a NICA has an organization, a national organization that they go around. They have their own insurance. They have their leaders. Like they have mentors that walk you through the process and how to start chapters. The children that came to us, the students that came to us after that, they recognized that that other students were advocating for themselves, so they came to talk about the skate clubs that they wanted to do. And they were actually turned away by the principal, did not want to have that on his campus. So, but these kids were advocating for it. So in this policy that we have here, it stops there. And we would have no idea if they would have given up. And for me, it just feels like if it stops there, then these students are going to say, okay, well, I guess we can't do it, and it ends there. I know you're saying that some students may persist and they may come to us, but don't feel like...
I understand, but I do have a wondering. And so my wondering is, when you say that the principal stopped it there, I wonder, was the reason why it was stopped there was because due to the insurances that we have, we didn't have the appropriate coverage to have it on that particular campus or any particular school at this time. And so what I do understand is the way that the policy is written now and the information that Ms. Posey just shared is that now we have the opportunity to have these type of programs on campus because this policy and the RMP has removed the barriers of the liability insurances that used to be something that would be a barrier from a school having that particular program on their particular campuses. That's what I understand.
Okay, I'll forward the email to you so you can read it.
Yes, ma'am.
And then we can talk about it. But
Absolutely.
my question really was about the difference between the NICA club and the skate club, since one is an organization, a nationwide organization that has its own insurance and everything, and a skate club that is going to be something that is student-led. Because then, when she was talking about 6801, it sounded like it was more that, but it does fit under the liability that this policy would cover us. So where's the line and how do we
So I
define
think
that?
this is actually a case of both and.
Okay.
That when there was the initial move to have the biking club, that there were I think the constraints that were pushed out by risk management to say that this is an activity that we feel is too risky. And then at that point, I think that is when the NICA club got involved and said, well, as an organization, we can provide coverage, blah, blah, blah. And so there was still the idea of, even with that, risk management recommended that this is not a risk that we need to take on, which has led to this policy to say we will put additional things in place where we can remove that barrier. So I think this is a both and, that it probably started out as a student club and with liability issues that were concerned. Then you went to an outside organization, but then there were the same barriers that were there, and now we removed those. Now, Nate, I know you weren't here for that part, but I would think generally that is the idea of what we all understand. Would that be correct? That it was in school club, then the NICA trying to sponsor on the outside, but risk management still saying we don't need to do it.
And I would add, Ms. Caulfield, to have a skate club, the skate club would need to be off-premise, and it would need a sponsor. So that is something that our insurance has said that we can't have, because there is still exposure if they are skating on our campus. And so the club would have to be sponsored off-premise and through an organization that has that general liability insurance. The only insurance, and it's actually in the next presentation, that we have expanded and is on a board agenda this evening, is to have coverage for all of our student activities. And we can speak to that in our next presentation for you.
So it does have to have an organization sponsor?
It will need to have an organization sponsor that.
And so, as far as
Just piggybacking off of Ms. Caulfield, I needed to, and Ms. Gordon's statement to help me. I know the chief said what he said, but I'm concerned, and maybe everybody is great, but if it stops with the principal, can there be something or in there for people to know to request the steps in which to ask? Because I'm being realistic and I'm looking at trends within the district over the 30 years that I've been a part of it. I would like to at least see that people know what to do if the answer at the principal's level is a no. I don't know if anybody else cares about that. I don't know what that looks like, but the challenge that I see in the engagement process with our community is that most families don't know what to do when they're told no at the school base. They don't know that there's an area superintendent. Most people don't even know area superintendents exist. That's why they come directly to us as board members, so they don't know that there is another level beyond the principal, and they feel helpless in their process. So how do we fix that? I know we can't fix everything, but how do we begin to fix that? I'm just concerned, just like the both of my two colleagues, of the same thing, that, for whatever preference the base leader has, says no. How do they even know that there's other options? Because we take what our leaders say is face value, and that's it. So what is that? What can that look like, Ms. Posey?
So I think that's more of a parking lot thing to kind of figure out as we move forward. I think the rest of those parts are applicable to 6801, if I got that correct, not the student activity pieces, but great.
This organizational piece is the piece that we're talking about today, which was just told that if the principal says no, that it ends in the water. Is that correct?
So based off of that, I'd also looked at staff to say, hey, will there be guidance to go out to share what will happen and go, to lay out the policy? But I will say, within the 4 years I've served on the board, this is an opportunity for us to really take what we're hearing from the community, turning it into action, and guiding folks through. And so
I hear you, Chair Swanson, but might I add, but I did have the floor of asking my question, but you decided to share your comments with my question.
Briefly, because we have 1 minute.
Thank you so very much. With that trend as well, are we not seeing the fact that families don't get an opportunity to know what to do? I'm sorry, that interchange has lost my whole thought. But my point again is, while I do want to move forward what you're asking for, at the same time, we say we'll come back to a thing. Can we have a timeline of when we're gonna come back to a thing? Because I'm only talking, you've been here for 4 years, I've been here for the 2 years that I've served, but I've also been in the district for a very longer time of watching these things play out. And so I'm simply trying to make sure that families have a voice and know a process to utilize the great policy we're trying to put in place. So will we have a timeline of when we can come back?
Which I thought I was answering that question, which I said certain parts of this will be coming to the next policy committee meeting, which gives us a timeline to move this. I mean,
I will add that on my planning board for the June policy committee, haven't had a chance to talk about this with Neil yet. I could put it on next week if I can get a review with him. And what it takes is, it takes the School Board Association's model policy, which is student activities, 3620, and it incorporates policy 6800, which are really school-sponsored groups, student government, science club, etc. It incorporates 6801, which is, right now, we're calling student-initiated non-curriculum groups, related groups. But in conversation with Attorney Malone, he has recommended, and I think it's a great idea, we can split that, we can sort of bifurcate that into outside organization, outside agencies, or outside agency or group, student clubs, organized student clubs, and student-initiated. Because whether the student initiates it and asks the outside club to come in, who's organizing the activity, who's in charge of the activity, who's planning the bike route, who's leading the bike route, it's the organization who's doing that. If an outside agency or organization comes to a school and asks the principal, we would like to host a student club on your campus, does it have to be student initiated? No. The principal could decide, I think that would be great for our student body to have Organization X host a club on our campus. It would be organized and facilitated and carried out by the organization. Have a faculty person there to attend, watch, whatever, but not carry it out. And then you would also have the final, sort of the other tail of that would be the student-initiated clubs that students run, and there's a faculty sponsor, so that you really do have their student groups, not school-sponsored groups, whether the student group is run by an outside organization, a club, a group, whatever you want to call it, and a student-initiated part that would go there, and all of that will be 3620. The other piece of 3620 is intramural. That's a school-sponsored thing. And then all of the RMP for 6800 and 6801, including this RMP, goes behind that. The truth about the RMP for 6800, if you look at the very end of it, the last time it was revised was 1991. There's some very outdated language about honor societies in there that I need to update with our academic staff. That part I'm not sure I can get done the next week, but the policy piece for 3620, incorporating all of those policies in one, would be student activities, and then we could tailor out who's sponsoring, whether it's the school itself, an outside organization, or a student-initiated.
so I don't want to defer Policy Chair Edmonds' agenda for that one, so I think of June as a perfect time to bring this back to give staff more opportunity. Policy Chair Edmonds?
Yeah, so our next meeting is next week, so it won't be on May's agenda, but I think what you're talking about, Ms. Rice, and was, echoed by other colleagues, is we need an appeals process. And we have an appeals process for many, many other things. So I have no problem with that, and it's clear that we need more discussion. So I welcome this to come to policy, and if we can put it on June's agenda, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
No sweat.
Sounds good to me. So thank you all, and so just to clarify, this will be on the agenda just to ensure that we can get this first part over the hurdle so those clubs can move forward, and then other discussions will come forward to the June committee. All right. That works. Thank you all for diving into this. And hopefully we can get some time back. I'm going to move us to our calendar conversion, so we'll wrap
I didn't.
I thought that was all.
There was another presentation in there that we had, but if we kind of covered a lot of it in the RMP. There's a presentation in there if you have questions about the student accident insurance that we provided. We shared it with you back in October, but we were able to afford it within our existing budget. So we did expand that to all students. That covers any activities that our students do.
Thank you. I felt like we had wrapped the conversation. I'm
I think
sorry
we did.
to.
I agree.
I was not trying to intentionally overlook that.
No, absolutely.
But thank you, Ms. Posey,
You're
for the work
welcome.
that you've done with this, as well as Dr. Crane. Thank you all.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so we will just welcome Mr. Carosa, Ms. Poya. I'm not sure talk about the final recommendations for school calendar. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Did you have any remarks first, sir? All right. We're here to talk to you today about our final recommendations from the staff level regarding calendar conversions. It's part of our multi-year approach to managing growth and enrollment across the district. For today, we want to take a quick step back in time and just remind everybody what the rationale is for even bringing forward calendar conversions. Go over the feedback we've collected over the last couple of weeks since we last saw you on May 5th, and then of course walk through the final recommendations that we have for your consideration and hopeful review and approval later tonight. As a reminder, this specific work aligns with Board Policy 4150, particularly the section referring to operational efficiency, and it aligns clearly with our strategic plan in three core areas: family and community engagement, equity-focused practices, particularly ensuring that we have a strong framework of support for students across all grades, and effective operations and services, as well as facilities. And we've talked about this before. This is the tail end of the 26-27 cycle, so it is happening concurrently with relatively step 4 of the 27-28 cycle. So we're just wrapping up our 26-27 planning cycle. And of course, we're here today specifically to make recommendations for your review and approval. As a friendly reminder, all the information we'll share today, as well as additional information and more detailed versions of some of the reports that we're sharing with you, can be found on our website. There's 2 ways to access this information, through the assignment planning website and navigating to step 6, or by going directly to the calendar conversion page. I want a special thank you to our communications department, in particular Harrison Light, for supporting us throughout this process and making sure that our content is up to date and that we're curating all the resources that families need on that calendar conversion page. So I just want to pause before we jump into anything and acknowledge, it is very clear that the communities involved in all of these discussions are very much in support of not only their schools and love their school communities, but they've really grown fond of their year-round calendars. That has not been a point of contention for us at the staff level. We understand that, which is why this is one of the more difficult and challenging tools that we use in our toolbox to manage facility utilization. We also want to review and clarify why the recommendations are needed in the first place. And so just quickly, the strategy or the strategic rationale really is related to operational effectiveness and then with a lens of equity and stewardship. So when we're talking about equity, we're looking at program equity and staffing equity. And when we're looking at that stewardship, really concretely fiscal stewardship for the district, making sure that we're being good stewards of those taxpayer resources, especially when the resources aren't necessarily needed to accommodate the enrollment at a given school. More specifically, when we're talking about program equity and talking with our principals and our area superintendents, and we have a couple in the room if we need to get into more details, there are some real structural constraints with having underutilized multi-track schools. I feel like that point has been made, and I feel like everyone understands that when you're stretching the resources thin across a couple of under-enrolled tracks, it makes it very hard to have high equity in your programming across all the tracks that are enrolled. We've also hit the limits of creative scheduling in all of the campuses that are before you today. And we really can't resolve many more concerns just by being creative with how we schedule. We've also heard not only from staff, but from families. When you're on a small under-enrolled track, you're with that same peer group for as many as, K through 8, with not a lot of interaction and diverse perspectives, particularly if you're on an isolated, let's say, track 2, where there's only a single cohort that's aging forward. And that creates not only academic and programming concerns, but also some relational concerns for families and students. And then, of course, not being able to balance those resources across the classrooms and thinking about even behavior needs. You have some students who maybe don't get along so well. You really have nowhere else to sort of reorganize or re-roster your classes to help them find a better fit and a better group. From a staffing equity piece, our allotments at these schools and their current levels are just insufficient in some cases to cover their specials, some of their elective teachers. They're really relying on long-term substitutes in some cases to make ends meet. And that's not really an equitable way to deliver academic programming for our students. There's not sufficient personnel. This was something that kind of came new to us as we continue to survey staff. There's not always sufficient personnel when they're underutilized and under sort of staffed, if you will, to cover all those responsibilities and roles. No one gets not as many people get to have their true planning period because they're constantly having to cover for carpool or cover for cafeteria duty, or perhaps substitutes are having to fill in those roles and they don't know the students as well and don't have the relationships with them that the core teachers do. And then, of course, being able to collaborate as teachers and PLCs when you're on an isolated track with only one grade for that track. So being able to get everybody on the same and unified calendar would really support a lot of these, or sort of address a lot of these concerns. And then fiscal stewardship. We shared with you last time the number of months of employment that we were looking at sort of across the board with the schools that we were discussing. If you were to move forward with the recommendations as included in this presentation for the 27-28 school year, it would be a rough estimate of about $690,000 in savings, with an additional rough estimate of $345,000 in the 28-29 school year. So all combined would be $1 million. Now, we've got really specific details on the next slide and in the addendum that was created for you so that you can see school by school what that impact would look like. And Ms. Kinsey's here with us if we need to answer any questions related to the budget. So we showed you this sort of slide, but we talked about it only from a months of employment perspective. You'll now see that the bottom row includes those totals that we verbally discussed at our last session. I think the actual estimated total at this point, based on $26, $27 at the sites that we're specifically talking about, is just over $1 million, with $37,161 sort of added onto that total. One thing to keep in mind, and we'll be honest, if you convert any of these schools to either Track 4 or traditional, you achieve these cost savings. So the other thing we've also been looking at is the transportation impacts. We did get a more robust review of the potential impacts, and we're seeing that the current routes that students have will most likely be able to be maintained. They might have updated schedules, maybe your pickup time might change by a few minutes. Those schools that are being served on K8 campuses, I'm thinking of the Heritages and the Holly Groves, if they are on a combined route, they would be able to maintain that combined route, so families wouldn't expect a change in that perspective. The siblings get on together. There might be additional runs needed with all students in at the same time, but it wouldn't necessarily require any new routes, which basically means no new buses, no new drivers, but maybe a few additional double backs here and there to accommodate the additional students all being in at the same time all the time.
And it's still a strained resource regardless of what we do. Just want to remind you of that.
But at best, we're not making more routes. At worst, we're not taking any off. All right, so then if we look at the feedback received from our recent public engagement, we showed you this at the May 5th presentation, but we've added a row to the bottom and kind of updated the totals and the views of the videos. Since the last time we were together, there's now been a total of 417 views of the recordings of the original sessions in March. That May 13th session was the day before our due date for submitting materials, so we weren't able to put that in for you, but I checked this morning and we've had at least 19 views through some point this morning of the session that we held on May 13th, but we did have 43 participants join us for that and actively participated and engaged. So we've had a total of 759 participants plus the additional 19 views since we started the process in earnest for this particular cycle in March. And that's just on the sessions. So let's talk about the general session feedback. So the live session that we had on May 13th, based on the questions that were captured and the comments that were shared, these key takeaways sort of came from that session. Families really wanted us to understand that in many cases it was a purposeful choice to move to a particular community because they were seeking out a year-round calendar. And so that's just something that needs to be reflected on, and all of us need to think about when making final decisions. There continue to be some concerns that the peak carpool that the schools are already experiencing when, let's say, all 3 tracks are in, if that's the daily experience for them, just continued concerns there. And so we are continuing to share that feedback with our facilities partners and the principals and area superintendents so that, carpool is a challenge on many of our school sites, and so just continuing to make sure we're not thinking about that. There are economic and childcare impacts on 2 sides of the economic piece. We've had a couple of business owners as well as even family members talk about businesses that have propped up to support track-out camp and track-out care, and just being concerned about what these changes might do to their ability to maintain that particular business model. In addition, there are childcare impacts for some families. Having the track-outs allows them to save up and intermittently pay for those care services during the track-out periods, where other families do see that there might be some cost benefits of having a traditional summer, because maybe I can send you to the aunt's house or something for the summer and maybe not have to pay for camps through the whole summer. But we have, from the year-round groups in particular, they've talked about how that really helps them, especially if they have maybe two professional parents that are working full-time, or both, whoever in the family group is working. That might be a little bit more affordable for them to space out the cost of those track-out camps. We've had continued conversations about the growth projections and zoning, particularly in the Wake Forest area, and we've talked through that during the May 5th conversation, and some of the details are in the appendix of today's presentation if you will need to review it. Mental health and teacher retention, a slightly different perspective, maybe not so much focusing on student performance outcomes, but student mental health. Concepts like the word burnout has been used quite a lot. And the same maybe even for teachers. And there is some conversation, at least from some teacher groups and maybe even some parents, that they're concerned that teachers might leave the school if it doesn't maintain a year-round calendar. So again, something that the board should be considering weighing along with the data sets. And then extracurriculars versus education. We've talked a little bit, particularly at the middle school level, about the benefits from an access and equity perspective for students if they're on the traditional calendar, because that means all students are in when activities are running, and all students have access to bus service when activities are running, but there are some that feel like maybe we're over-representing that perspective. And so just being mindful of that. As far as the Thought Exchange, that was the online platform that we used. I will acknowledge it was a slightly different format. I think I shared that with you at the May 5th presentation. Based on feedback we've received in prior sessions, continuing to use the sort of Post-it note version of the Thought Exchange with the ratings after we've already done that once seems to fall a little bit flat for families. They like to be able to provide more substantive comments. And so this version that we used allowed them to really do long-form comments and to deeply reflect on those comments. And it did give us a much more robust sort of view into what the specific concerns are, not just I like it, I don't like it, but here are the factors. And so through that, we were able to learn a little bit more about the benefits of the shorter and more frequent breaks of student engagement, retention, and overall well-being. I think we get that sometimes in those snippets, but that long-form sort of perspective really clarified what it is parents were thinking was really good for their students personally. Also just saying that it's beneficial for managing school capacity long-term. Again, we've already talked about supporting local businesses and then providing that flexibility for working families or families with working parents. Some respondents did advocate for a single track. In fact, you'll see that that's kind of the compromise that's hitting in the middle for the groups. Like there are some, people think we're not telling the truth. There are some families that have said, ooh, we're excited about traditional because we'll have K-12 calendar alignment for our family. Certainly the volume of those are much less than those that are in favor of year-round. But there are some that have said, for our family, this actually could be really beneficial. But it seems like going to that single track or track 4 might be a consensus point for both sides of the discussion. And then, as I said, there are some that are supporting the traditional for that synchronization with middle and high school. And candidly, beyond this particular survey, as we've been doing this type of work, sort of recommendations, if you will, for the last 4 or 5 years, this swelling of having the different calendars as a family has become an emerging conversation point, but I get when it's my family and we're really used to it, it feels a little bit different. So just something to keep in mind. We didn't get here, without thinking through all of that. We did have 743 participants log in to the Thought Exchange and a total of 565 complete every single question. It was more of a survey format. So that's roughly a 76% completion rate, so that's pretty good. We're not surprised by the distribution of location or, role type or even, we did ask a question to help us better for communication because we did hear from a lot of families, hey, we don't feel like we're learning, so we're trying to figure out what communication methods are working. And word of mouth is really high up there, as well as, of course, our district, the messaging that we're sending, and then messaging from the principal. So we're going to keep pushing on all of those avenues for future engagement opportunities to make sure that everybody is aware of the discussions that are happening. And I sort of gave the lead away on this one, but when we looked at the common ground between all of those that participated in the online Thought Exchange in particular, it seems that whether or not the year-round elements were important to the family or the traditional elements were important to the family, there seemed to be some consensus around this idea that perhaps a single track or a track 4 might sort of split the difference. And then just overall, our page, again, thank you to Harrison for keeping our page up to date. By time of print, we didn't have the update on the page views, but we had 661 views in addition to the number that you see there through May 13th. So it's been, again, a really welcome resource for families. And you can see that in the online forums, all total between the ones we held in March and the one we just did in May, just under 2,000 total participants. Again, all of the information we've shared is here to include an interactive version of the Thought Exchange report. So if families want to look and see a little bit more detail about what came out of that Thought Exchange, they're welcome to access the report on our calendar conversion page. And so that brings us to our final recommendations. So before we jump into these, I just want to pause and just remind ourselves that part of what staff and the long-range planning team has been thinking about is that stability piece. That's really been the mantra for the last 4 or 5 years. Can you give us stability where we are, or if you're going to make a change, can it be a change that lasts? And so that's part of where you're seeing us fall into some of the recommendations, thinking about that K-12 calendar alignment that gives long-term stability for families over the long term. Maybe it's a disruption today that provides that stability in the future. And then others are equitable access to not only programming during school hours, but programming outside of school hours, and our effort to make progress toward our operational efficiency goals. We certainly heard loud and clear that was part of our charge in our area, is to try to find ways to reduce costs so that we can put those in other areas of the budget that are more critical for student engagement. We do want to make sure you're aware that there's 2 pieces of extra information available to you. There's an addendum that the first sheet kind of looks like this. We had some questions about the history of the calendars of the school, so that's included in the addendum. We also gave you the detailed school-by-school breakdown of the cost estimates so that you could see by campus what the changes would be. And then we gave you another copy of what we shared with you at the May 5th about how the alignments improve or don't improve if you go, let's say, with the recommendations that we're providing, or maybe go with a single track 4 option. And then the appendix of this particular presentation has all of the growth and projected crowding data that we shared with you on May 5th if you feel like you need to refresh. I don't want you to have to go digging for it. So for the summary of recommendations, we're going to start specifically with the Northeastern area. And here we have Heritage Elementary and Heritage Middle. We will acknowledge that the community is not in favor of going traditional. We hear that. This is a long-range planning, data-driven recommendation, providing long-term stability in the future and providing K-12 alignment long-term for the region. So we're not listening to the feedback. We're also weighing that operational efficiency and stewardship of resources. In addition, Heritage Elementary is not the only elementary school that feeds into this campus, and the other elementary schools in the region that do feed into this campus will need to maintain a multi-track year-round calendar for the time being, and having a traditional calendar middle at least provides that one change in calendar at 6th grade and then their traditional all the way through 12th. For the other elementary students who are aligned to Heritage Middle, if it were to go, let's say, a track 4, because we have heard that as a proposal, then that would mean those families could potentially be on track 1, 2, or 3 in elementary school, have to change to track 4 for middle school, and then traditional for high school. Even if they only have a single student, that's 3 calendar changes in the life of the student. If they have multiple students, 1 in middle school and 1 in elementary school, it's quite possible that the middle school student could be on track 4, while the elementary student's on track 1, 2, or 3. So just thinking through that, that's why this recommendation has been brought before you as staff. It also provides flexibility so that if any other elementary schools in the region need to go multi-track year-round because of the K-3 class size legislation, you would at least only have that one pain point of traditional at 6th grade. But we get it, right? We get that the community is not in favor of this recommendation. Looking at the southern area, similar. The first round of information sessions in March, it seemed a little bit mixed reviews. We had a lot of people saying, oh, I can see the K-12 calendar alignment for the Holly Groves would be really, really helpful. And hey, could we just do this in 27, 28 so we're not holding our breath and waiting and waiting and waiting for the change? We know that our schools have changed in their enrollments as new schools have opened in the area. And so that's why we brought forth the traditional calendar recommendation for 27 and 28 for both Holly Grove Elementary and Holly Grove Middle. Again, similar to before. The only challenge in terms of the dates is that Heritage Elementary and Heritage Middle currently don't operate a track 2, so they've already reduced tracks. So if they held in that formation for 26, 27, and 27, 28, and then change to traditional, that would give their staff and families time to prepare for that type of change. That was our thinking behind the recommendation. Here, Holly Grove Elementary and Holly Grove Middle currently operate all 4 tracks. If we don't expedite whatever decision you all do make for this particular set of schools, the families are likely going to experience multiple calendar changes as they get shifted off of under-enrolled tracks and then have to change calendars. So that's part of why we're recommending the 27-28 implementation for that pair of schools. Holly Springs Elementary and Rex Road are similar in that track configuration. Because of the new elementary schools that have opened in the region, and Rex being one of them, there's not a need to persist and wait and delay. We could implement these as early as 27, 28. Different from Holly Grove and Elementary and Middle, which are on the same campus. Holly Springs and Rex are on independent campuses. And Rex is sort of, as we mentioned on May 5th, the sort of last edge of schools that we have in that part of the county. So having the ability to flex back to multi-track would be very helpful. And Holly Springs, being one of the few elementary schools that's somewhat near that Viridia area, may need to support us in managing that growth as it comes online. So having the flexibility to go back up to multi-track would be nice to have that school in that region from a long-range planning perspective. And then the last set of recommendations we have for you are in the northwestern area, specifically Pleasant Grove and Sycamore Creek Elementary. Pleasant Grove, similar to Rex, is kind of the last school on the edge of the county in that region, and so being able to flex back to multi-track in the future as growth rebounds in their area would be very helpful. In addition, most, if not all, of the families that attend Pleasant Grove Elementary were recently assigned from multi-track elementary schools, Parkside Middle and Alston Ridge Parkside Elementary and Alston Ridge Elementary into the school when the calendar was converted, so this would provide some semblance of stability of calendar for these families. And it is, a portion of it is still aligned to Alston Ridge Middle, so that would work okay. It's a multi-track year-round middle. Sycamore Creek, a little bit different animal. They've got a relatively large 4th and 5th grade population that just needs a little bit of time to age out, and so the 28-29 implementation is what we'd recommend. Staff has recommended track 4, but I will be candid in the thought exchange and through the information session. We have heard some asking for traditional because they do align with Pine Hollow, which is a traditional calendar middle school, so just something for you to weigh and consider before you make a final decision. We cleaned up our proposed stability rules. If you were to take the recommendations as we prepared them, we thought that the stability rules would be important. Any base students at any of these schools, of course, would remain assigned to their school, and we would recommend that they get some sort of priority if their school specifically is converted to traditional calendar to be able to request a transfer to a year-round school in a different area. If their schools are converted to, let's say, track 4, then I don't think that that would be necessary. For the other school, students who are at the school by calendar application, so those are students for whom it is not their base school, but it is on the list of identified schools that comes with transportation. For these families, we would start by initially assigning them to their base school because we always want to make sure that your initial assignment comes with transportation. And then we would go forward from there. If they would like to participate in the stability transfer process and remain at their current school regardless of the calendar change, we recommend that we should do that. Or if they were to ask for a transfer to a year-round school, particularly if their school was converted to traditional, that we should give them priority for that type of request. And then, of course, option 3 would be to remain assigned to your base school and move forward with that transition. And I think with that, we're just quickly going through the timeline. At this point, we're toward the end of this particular process. We're taking it to you for a vote later tonight, and then we would support families. Because of the timing and because it'll be a board meeting, it'll probably be a little bit longer. We'll most likely get our messaging out to families tomorrow, once we know what the clear and final decisions are of the board. So we'll send messaging out to the families first thing tomorrow with any instructions and information. And with that, sir, I'll turn it over to you.
Ms. Boyer, and
I tried to go as fast as I could.
thank you and your team for diving into this. I know that we have been receiving numerous emails about this, and I understand the importance that this has for families and how these changes can impact their day-to-day lives. And so I'll just say that any recommendation that the board will have will take place next, well, we can discuss them here, but they will be on the action. I do know that I've heard from both Dr. Jobe and Ms. Caldwell with the changes that they would like to see for their 2 schools in their district. Did you have a question, Dr. Jobe?
No, not a question. I mean, I don't know if we want to discuss right now or...
I do have a quick point. So if we do look at making recommendations for Heritage Elementary and Middle to track 4, I would suggest that we offer it as a 27-28 change instead of waiting until 28-29. I think that'll help with the anxiety of both the staff and the principal of having to organize the classrooms and whatnot, so that'll help.
Oh, yes, that's very helpful. Dr. Jobe, your comment or question that you wanted to raise?
I did want to say, I brought this up with Dr. Taylor before, and I know I said this over email, but I think it's important enough to say one more time. I really appreciate all that you've done. I think this is extremely difficult, and I know...
That's why it's the last tool in the toolbox that we use.
Right, I understand. One thing I will make a suggestion about is that one thing that might have allayed some parents' anxiety is if you had taken feedback at the May 13 meeting when you said you were going to take feedback. Like, they felt like they showed up, some people even prepared statements and stuff, and there was no time to do that. And considering the invitation even said that you would accept feedback, they felt very silenced at that meeting, and I want to advocate for them in this moment. And I'll also say that, like, we had a presentation just a couple months ago about how different the projections are for growth this year versus last year. And next year, it could change back, or it might not, so I want to keep that in mind as well. So, that's it.
Any other, Mr. Hager?
Thank you. So just a couple of things, three points. The first is really more of a question, and this came up during some of our early discussion, and I don't know, I think it might have been Mr. Hershey who asked it originally, and we heard an answer, but we needed a little bit more to expound on it. When we talk about a multi-track year school going to a single track, traditionally we're always talking about track 4, and there's been some different reasons for that. But when we look at the upstream impacts, how that change in calendar could affect a multi-track middle school that it feeds into, for example, if all the elementary schools feeding into the middle school switch to track 4, then the parents are going to be upset because not everyone can be on track 4. There was a question about whether elementary schools could be single track on a track other than track 4. And the quick response we got was, well, no, we don't think so because of special education services. But we didn't know if there was anything beyond that, if there was any flexibility, or if, any research or consideration into alternative single-track calendars were out there as we measure the impact of these conversions on the schools above them or below them.
So legally, there's nothing that prevents us from using track 1, 2, or 3. I think as a district, because of the way that we may share resources across the district, having them on a similar calendar, track 4, is the best way to utilize those resources, but we can continue to work with other departments to make sure that for an impacted school, maybe there's a particular school that may not share resources that can have that flexibility, that feeds to a multi-track, that we can balance that. I know the middle school principals would really appreciate that because it's a lot less impact on them having to change people's tracks over time, but we can certainly look at that.
And so that just goes to my second point, which is as we consider these changes for specific schools, we're impacting not just the school's calendar we're changing, but again, their feeder schools and the schools beyond that. We saw this when we made the changes, for example, to Pine Hollow Middle. There was sentiment in the community to keep the school year-round, but there were fiscal reasons to convert it to, a traditional calendar. It had been operating track 4, and even at track 4, it was still under-enrolled. But because of the change, then there was pressure on the elementary schools feeding into it to accommodate parents with students of siblings in middle school and elementary school. So even though, for example, Sycamore Creek may have had students to support 4 tracks in a multi-track calendar, the principal was under pressure to try to compact tracks or reduce them to increase more students per track to match it up to the middle school. And so as we consider these changes, just look beyond just the individual school, but the schools that feed into it and the schools they might go into. The last thing I wanted to note is as we look at the savings, I'd ask just all of you to balance both sides of the equation. We know from earlier this afternoon, we've got $10 million we're going to start in the hole for next year's budget because of choices we made to balance this year's budget using one-time money, also looking at projected changes in Medicaid revenues, et cetera. So a $1 million in total savings is impactful. The other thing I will note, though, is if you look at the individual costs out of our entire budget for like one elementary school or one middle school, you could look at that and judge that that is a modest change for the number of people that it impacts. So if we decide, for example, that there's a recommendation to move to traditional calendar, but we don't want to do that, if we wanted to keep it multi-track, that will be a cost to us, but you can judge whether, what the impact of that cost is versus other impacts we might have to make with other budget items last year, later on. And then please don't overlook what I think I heard staff say, which was the cost of changing the calendar or the difference between a track 4 school and a traditional calendar school is not that different.
Right,
Is that
you get
correct?
the same cost savings either way.
So you do get those cost savings, so that might give you some more options to consider. So those are just the points I wanted to make.
So I'll do a follow-up. Do you 1 second, Dr. Joe? I want to make sure there's no other board members that have a question. And
I just want to add something to that. One other thing I was thinking about the track 4 option, if you're considering going to track 1, 2, or 3, the only thing you have to consider is staff with children. So you would be limiting the number of options that they would have at surrounding schools to be able to align with their own calendar, but that's just something else to think about.
Okay, thank you.
any other, do you have a questions, Phil?
I have a couple.
Sure, go for it.
And a couple of comments,
Sure.
if I could, and I know we're voting on it, so I think it's really important. I was asked a couple of questions, so I would like just clarification. Why Sanford Creek Elementary School didn't seem to be in the equation, so could you explain?
The base attendance area for Sanford Creek Elementary is not Heritage Middle. I believe it's Roseville Middle.
Roseville Middle,
She's got the list.
And Wake
But
Forest.
it's traditional middle school. So any student at Sanford Creek that's attending Heritage Middle is having to request it and get approved, and not all of those are guaranteed. So it is not their base feeder.
So the feedback that I got was that some of those families were, felt that they weren't participating in that because they were not made aware. So just knowing for the future, if it's a significant amount of people, then they would have liked to be included in that. How many students do you know?
It's 14 from Sanford.
I didn't know what the rest of her question
Oh,
was.
sorry.
How many students are from Sanford Creek that actually are in
At
that
Heritage
base
Middle.
that would go to Heritage Middle?
I don't think we have that on, well, we can get that for you before we talk about it tonight.
I know there's 82, I believe there's 82 that are calendar application, but that's across 15 different schools.
Okay. And then with...
That's just for one grade.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, for 6th grade. yeah.
Okay. Just for understanding the numbers and everything you broke down, and I know that you have, your whole team has put a lot of work into this, so I do recognize that. How many students are in each track? Because like, I know in some of these schools, we've collapsed track 2. How much are, in general, are in each track before we flow into another track?
It's the high school, excuse me, the middle school level, it's somewhere around the 115 to 120 range is like that ideal number for a group of students.
Okay.
So if I have at least that many, I can run a whole track and have 4 teachers, and that way no one's teaching 2 subjects, and I have enough months to get the specials and stuff. If I go below 100, it starts to get really tight, and then you might have somebody teaching 2 subjects, or maybe even 2 grades, and when you get like below 60, that's when you have 1 teacher teaching 2 subjects, maybe only 2 teachers on the team at all, and you start to get some compromises in the programming there.
And what about elementary school?
That's going to be site-specific because it depends on the number of classrooms that they have. So you're looking at that 18, 16, 17, 17 formula for kindergarten through 3rd grade. So I need at least that many for a single track. If I can double that, then I can do a double track. Some schools can double on 2 tracks. Some schools are actually designed to be able to double on 4 tracks. I think all of the ones we're talking about here, Glenn, are designed to double on 2.
2 double, yeah.
So they need 6 sections to be full.
At a minimum.
So for Heritage Elementary, since that's one of the choices, what are we thinking about one particular track?
Meaning,
To keep it multi-track, we have 4 tracks, like how much do we?
You need a minimum of 2 kindergartners to have 1 section in each track, but then that starts to get you those programming issues where I don't have 2 sections, right?
Right.
And then ideally, you would want...
and if you have to collapse a class because the enrollment drops at, let's say,
Then they gotta
class
change
1,
tracks.
then they're going to have to move people off of that track.
Okay.
But you need about 108 kindergarten students, which is roughly what you would need for 2nd and 3rd. The formulas are slightly different because that's 16, 17, and 17 for those grades respectively.
And another reminder, when you talk about program equity, when you do try to run like a single classroom at every track to continue 4 tracks, there's also going to be a track that doesn't have a specialist that's in there during their track out. So let's say the specialist is on track 4, so you're going to have two tracks at some point are going to have a sub during their specialist time. And generally, the feedback we get from principals is they don't have the extra months of employment to pay for an additional months of employment for your specialist to be 11 to 12.
If you collapse a track?
No.
If you
you're
only have
trying to
1
run-
section on each 4 track.
Yeah, if you're
and on
trying,
each track.
yeah. If your enrollment
You
is
need to
that
be
low where
double.
you're running a single
Okay.
on every class, you're going to
At
have...
some point, there's going to
yeah.
be some programming issues.
Yes.
Okay, and you
Despite
probably
these
won't
formulas.
have this answer for me right now, but if you could let me know how many requests that we get to transfer to the year-round options in a year.
Per school?
Well, for this one in particular, because this
For
is a
Heritage
lot of
Elementary.
feedback that I've heard is that they were denying. So how can we
We've
say
acknowledged
they're
that in
under-
our sessions. There are quite a few people that are requesting it. They currently don't have a track 2, so that complicates things. They don't have their full capacity. But the schools around them also are not fully enrolled, so we don't have an operational need to move those students out of other middle schools to fill Heritage, right? So we have been open and honest about that.
Then my last question would be in reference
Yeah,
to
yeah.
that one is, are they able to expand the boundaries? Because we do it all the time. We change boundaries.
We talked about that at the elementary level, that was an option, but we felt like that was probably more disruptive just from a long-range planning standpoint. But I'll let you take it from
Yeah,
there.
for the middle school, it'd be at what cost? Because you just have too many seats available for the number of students. I mean, so when you're looking at the surrounding middle schools, I think, you're in the 70%, I think, for, go to the middle school. Yeah, so Wake Forest Middle School's at 82%, Wakefield Middle's at 68%, Rollsville at 79%. So if you're taking
And
students
Durant
from
at
those
64.
schools, yeah, Durant at 64, if you're taking students from those schools to fill up Heritage to get to 100%, where does that leave your surrounding schools?
Well, I
You're just
think-
going to push that problem to them where they're going to have equity issues with their programming because they're under-enrolled.
Right, which I understand, but it doesn't look like anybody's close to 100%.
That's the reason why we're trying to reduce the multi-track, because we just don't have the need for the extra seats in the area.
Okay. And we all know that the concern there is how much charter and private there is in that area that's in like a stone throw of all of these schools. So trying to get them back to something that helps with them.
And that's
and
where I
then-
think staff's recognizing the fact that if track 4 is a way that you want to go, that is something that we can support, because you still are getting the cost savings.
Right, and I will share that that was the option from most of the people that I heard. If you are going to change it to traditional, please just do track 4. But they all wanted to keep the multi-track. So I'm just trying to find ways that we can find ways to keep it, especially for the middle school, because it is the only year-round option that we have in that area. And I just wanted to share, as we're all considering voting for tonight, the biggest things that I heard myself, and I think we've seen some of the emails, is the burnout and retention for not only our teachers, but our students. And when we talk about like dollars and well-being, that is a big thing, you know, so I think that helps with retention. I specifically have heard from teachers that have been doing this for 20-something years because they love it and they will not go to traditional. It's just the burnout at this point in their career.
And they shared that, and
Yeah.
that was reported out.
Okay.
Yeah, we acknowledge that that has been said 100%. Sorry, Mr. Swanson.
You're fine with that. So I know that you'll have a motion at the table to amend the staff's recommendation.
So you don't want us to make
for
changes now, we'll just address them.
Unless you all want,
It's up to you.
I know Ms.
It's a pleasure,
I
sir.
will be making a motion for at least track 4, and I can't vote for them to go to traditional. I don't know if that's easier for you to present that at the meeting.
We can acknowledge that the board wants to make a change when we revise the recommendation. We can certainly do that.
Okay.
Is that what, did you want to do like a thumbs up here so that it's an edit that we take forward?
Let's do a thumbs up. Is there a thumbs up for Heritage to be track 4 only?
Both heritages, or?
It's both Heritage,
Yes.
what Ms. Caulfield has
And elementary and
recommended.
middle school.
Yeah.
So we'll present that as a board revision.
And what about
could it be
27, 28
28?
would be a preferred recommendation?
Perfect.
Is that too soon for families?
Because it'll still be track 4, they'll still have that infrastructure, and it'll really help get the programming lifted back up.
It'll be less impactful, because otherwise you're going to have students in the next several
That might
years
go from
changing
track
tracks multiple times.
1 to
rather-
3 to 4, you know, this will let them just all go to 4.
So
We
it's
don't
not
have one
this
change.
coming year?
No,
it's
no, no,
for the
Correct, yeah, they've got a
Yeah,
whole,
they'll have
what is it, over 12,
13
yeah.
months at least.
Perfect. And then, well, I know Dr. Jobe had a similar recommendation for.
Olive Grove Elementary and Middle.
Same?
Track 4. Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other recommendations or modifications to the staff's recommendations?
So the only other thing is, I think now it would be Sycamore Creek is the
No,
only school.
yeah,
that
the
would wait
Sycamore
till
still
28,
needs
but
to wait
we'd
till
like to keep
28,
that one.
29, please. And then the question, did you want to entertain the traditional, or are we okay with the track 4?
I think we're okay with the track 4. By keeping it on the 27th, or keeping it on the year out, that's additional time to collect feedback and
Yes.
see how staff and families respond.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you all. We'll see you at the other side of this meeting. And then we will have our Ligon Magnet Middle School Legacy Committee update and design. And I know we are trying to get close on time.
We've got to go update materials for Melissa, so.
All right, so, thank you, Mr. Chair. As we are pulling up this presentation, we will move very quickly because we know we do have time. And today we want to give you an update on where we are with the Ligon project. I'll just talk briefly about the Ligon Legacy Committee, and then I will quickly pivot to Catherine Peel, who's going to talk about where we are in the process and the different designs that we've looked at. So just very succinctly, the Legacy Committee is doing, I think, the work that we wanted to do.
Dr. Taylor, if you can speak up just a little bit so Ms. Allen can
Okay, I'm sorry.
get the minutes appropriately.
Use your teacher voice.
Teacher work, oh, God. I've been recovering, so. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Chair, and with the Legacy Committee, you will see, if you can go to the next slide, the different members that are a part of this committee, and this has been really some robust conversation in terms of what we want to come out of this committee. The one thing that I've expressed to them is that it is about looking at the historical context of the building and providing perspectives and stories from the various members of the Ligon community, both alumni from the 50s and 60s and up through junior high and middle school, to give that perspective. So that has gone very well. At the first Legacy Committee meeting, Vice Chair Hershey and Board Member Rice and I, we were there. We did have to leave that committee meeting early to come back to a meeting here at the board. I think it was a work session, if I'm not mistaken. But we did have the opportunity to meet each of the members there, talk about what we wanted this committee to do, and some ideas about what we want this legacy to be like 20 years from now. Most people were highly engaged in the process of making sure that this was a proper memorial reflecting the wishes of the board and the community, and not just being a placard as I've talked about. They did have a chance to look at the 3 different designs. Mr. Hershey, Ms. Rice, and I were not there for that. And so I will let Ms. Peel talk about that some, but they did sort of eliminate one of those as a committee. Now, she is still going to bring all 3 back to the board, as you all have asked. I do believe after our second meeting, I know Mr. Hershey and I was able to be there. And Ms. Rice, we're going to have to pivot since we down know that Wednesday is work day for you. So as we look to the future, we're going to try and make some changes so we can accommodate you. But that was a very informative meeting in terms of what Carmen Coughlin was able to share. And that hopefully at some point we can have her to come and talk with the board about that. But they did get into the 3 different designs, or the 2 designs, and I think based on what I've seen, I won't make any predictions, but I believe that most people will probably coalesce around one of those designs, but we'll kind of go from there. The last thing I'll do, and I will hand it to Catherine, and I'll give you that now, you can click as you go through. But this is what I thought was very interesting from Carmen, and that is the history of what we believe about Ligon, and what she discovered in her research, if you will, is what was important to the community 70 years ago versus now. And one of those things that was clear is that the community had a different site in mind that they were highly engaged in having, but for whatever reasons they were not able to do that, and they landed on the site where we are now. And so that is kind of what we took from it, that is sacred ground today, but 70 years from now, it may be something totally different. And I think those are the interesting things that are coming out of the research that she has. And lastly, she did have conversations about how we get other memorabilia things brought forth. With that, Catherine, I'm going to pivot quickly because I know this is what the board wants to hear.
Sure.
And we will open up to any questions after that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to go through all of the information that we presented to the committee, with the site constraints and the drivers. I think y'all are pretty familiar with the site and, the challenges with the topography, and it's a small site, but we're excited about the direction, the 3 options, and then the one that we really narrowed down to with this committee last week. I'm just going to jump ahead. So we presented 3 preliminary design concepts of really the building turning in different directions and where it faces. Scheme A really is more aligning with Haywood. Scheme B facing MLK Junior Boulevard, and Scheme C was really looking back up the hill towards the former Ligon campus. The committee really overwhelmingly was not in favor of Scheme C. They liked A and B, but suggested some modifications, which we went back to the drawing table and made some changes that we presented last week. So the Scheme A updated, the big change is really having a fairly ceremonial lobby off of Haywood, and that lobby connecting through to the parking lot on the east side. And I think the committee was really excited about that idea of, again, of a legacy of an entry off of Haywood. And that public lobby would really organize all of the public spaces, the gym, the dining, the auditorium, with the central lobby, a 2-story lobby. And you can see that sort of traveling through there. So a lot of excitement about this and around the idea of a history spine that goes through the school, really good solar orientation for the classrooms. We made some changes to Scheme B. They had recommended that we flip the auditorium in the classroom and again have more of a major entry off of Haywood. But the more the committee talked about it, we feel like a 3-story classroom wing along the east side of this property against residential areas would not be a good measure. And everyone, the more they looked at it, said even though we love, in some ways the school facing MLK Junior Boulevard, putting that element on the east side of the site might not be the best approach in terms of being a good neighbor. So I'm skipping through this, but really we did a show of hands, and every hand in the room was unanimous towards Scheme A in terms of really liking this the best. Again, representing that history and legacy of an entry off of Haywood. We have had a preliminary sketch plan review with the City of Raleigh with both A and B, and got good feedback from them in terms of that we were meeting requirements that we needed to meet with the city, particularly for transportation. One of the main goals is to get the bus and car traffic off the surrounding streets. If you go out there now, afternoon dismissal, cars back up on Lenore, the buses are parking on side streets and they're not queuing up on site. So that's our recommendation, and we really need some feedback, and I guess we'd love approval to move ahead with Scheme A to schematic design, and we would be bringing this back to you at the end of the summer for approval of schematic design with the facility committee. These are some of the images and the sort of thought starter work that we did with the committee in terms of the kinds of elements that they would like to see incorporated into the school. This piece will come later after the design is really solidified, but we got some great feedback that will be taken into consideration, and we'll be bringing ideas back to the committee starting back up in September. We have another meeting with them in June, and then we're going to give everybody a break for the summer while we work through some of the design direction on this project. So this is the schedule that we're looking at. Again, with that summer break, we're here today, again, with hoping to get a thumbs up to move ahead with Scheme A so that we can work hard over this summer to bring a schematic design back to you at your August facility committee meeting.
So with that, we'll just kind of hear feedback from the board about those general designs and kind of what we think is the direction we want to hear from the board in terms of where you want to go. But again, I know Mr. Hershey, you were there to see those designs. I know Mr. Rice was not that first meeting when they came out, but the second they were there. And so that's what we kind of felt everybody coalesced around. But just, if we could just get general feedback of your thoughts, and we can pull those designs back up and just kind of hear from the board. David, you can come on up if you want to, man.
I saw Ms. Caulfield's hand first, Dr.
Yes,
Dean,
ma'am.
and then we'll go in that order. Ms. Caulfield?
I just have a question for number, for the second one, Scheme B. I just always think of East Wake High School because I know it's just logistically hard for you to get when you spread the buildings out so far. Does it matter if they switch the classroom and auditorium if the 3-story is really the issue? And it looks like they have a pretty good tree barrier, or is that just the drawing?
There's existing, all of those residents have a lot of trees in the backyard. I mean, obviously, the Ligon site itself is clear, so we don't really have any trees on our site because it's all ball fields down there now. But I think it was more around just the idea of that strong lobby element that continued through from Haywood to the main visitor entry off of the parking lot, so.
It just seems like the classrooms are so, I don't want to say disconnected. I understand the atrium and I love the history part of it. But it just seems like when you switch the classroom and the parking lot, it just seems so far away, the classrooms, to everything else.
For Scheme A?
For Scheme A, yeah.
I mean, it's a long, skinny side for sure. The students will have the majority of their day within that classroom block, right? So, and the arts are right there as well. So they do have a little bit more distance going to the gym or the dining for sure.
And if you look at them going to the gym or dining, and then if they go to the fields that are in the back, which I know we had already gave the thumbs up on that we would have that separate. I mean, that is quite a distance, and also to the library. So, I mean, is there any way for you to keep where the atrium is like that in Scheme A and switch the parking lot and the classroom?
Not really, in terms of the width of this thing is so tight, so.
Okay.
We also are moving utilities as part of this project, so we've got along the eastern property line, we have a new sewer easement that's going through, so.
Okay. It just seems like it's really logistically far.
Well, one of the things to know, these are just blocks right now, they're not the actual floor plan. We start out with, when we're designing, we start really big picture and take these blocks of program and move them around. So as we start consolidating this into a true floor plan, we are working to get this as a tighter footprint.
Okay. And can you remind us what the cost of the school was?
The total project budget is $141 million. Construction is not that much. That includes the soft cost.
So that's the all-in cost, fees and furniture and design, construction and everything. That's the total project budget.
So just wondering, because I know that we were I think we're asking to approve for the East Gardner Middle School, and they're at 73 million. What is the?
Totally different project, totally everything. We're keeping some of the buildings at East Garner Middle, like smaller school, small site, better site. It's not apples and apples.
We're also doing a larger auditorium at this school for the magnet program.
Okay. I love the history part of it, and these pictures, I assume, are just like reflections of what we plan on doing. It looks great, but it looks pretty fancy.
Well, this was just a brainstorm session to let folks weigh in on just some ideas around how we certainly wouldn't do all of that, so it's trying to be selective about what gets included.
Okay. I'd like to hear the feedback from Ms. Rice and Mr. Hershey, since you were there, about why we can't get the classrooms a little bit closer. It's just logistics.
You can circle back to them, but I'll go to Dr. E and then you guys can do
Okay, thank you. Just on the ceremonial lobby, is it available, is it accessible to the public? Like if people were wanting, is it something that?
After hours, yeah. So during the school day, all of the visitors would be coming in the main entry from the parking lot. The bus riders will be coming in that entry because the bus lane will be running parallel to Haywood. So all your bus riders are going to be coming in that lobby off of Haywood in the morning and in the afternoon. And then at night it can be opened up. So there's the bus queuing can be used as parking for regular cars at night. And so for night activities, you can come in and go to the auditorium without having to go into the rest of the school.
Yeah, I just want to, see this as a community celebration, 24/7, 365, right? I mean, that's something that is not just for the school time and school hours. So, thank you.
Chair, thank you. Just to, I guess, explain a little bit about the choice. I was there when the 3 different options were presented, and they did come to that conclusion because that Haywood space for the community was the original front facing of the school, and since they could not get where they originally desired for the school to be placed, and because we had to change it, everyone really pressed to have the school facing the original space, since they had to compromise on so many other things. And so that was something that's very important to the committee. But before I say anything else, I do have to acknowledge the amazing redemptive process that we have done with this particular selective committee. I think that our staff, Mr. Burnett and them, I must raise awareness to and to our architects that have listened during these committee sessions. I know I didn't attend this last one, but there was a lot of talk at the very first one of reimagining what it looks like, and what I see today as a presentation, I must honestly say, it looks like there was some active listening going on with staff, and they brought back, to me, from what I recall, exactly what the committee was asking for. And we had people that was a part of the committee that has been there since they went to school at Ligon and is still a part of the communities today. So I'm very happy to see this particular process that they did bring back. And it looks like it is moving in the direction of what the committee has desired to see in the long term. So that's the answer to your question, the reason why the Haywood. Ms. Cofield, if you ever get a chance to go to Southeast Raleigh, you really will see at Ligon, it's really not a big space. It looks long here, but in reality, it's not. I think it's just more magnified so that we can see it of what it looks like, but it's really not a long distance walk. It's not like what I had at Enloe from East Wing to West Wing. It's not even that long.
Or East Wing?
Right, or even East Wake's thing still. It's not even that size of the space. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's a lot more condensed. This is just magnified so that we can see of what it looks like, but it's not, the area is very tiny, which is why they were concerned about it even being on Haywood, because the streets of Lenore and everything is all really dense, like together, really, really bad. I hope that makes sense. For those who have gone to Ligon to see it, it is really dense. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Long pause. I didn't want to assume anything. I look forward to
We're
you.
good
So,
here. Yes, sir.
Ms. Gordon.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm pointing all in your.
I know, and this question may not be the right time for the scheme part of the process, but I know we had a lot of conversation around preserving like original parts of the building, whether it's, and I'm just using this as an example, the seats in the current auditorium, like, is that not for this part of the discussion?
We'll be bringing that
later?
back to you later,
Okay.
but we're going to be inventorying all summer. We actually have a summer intern coming on board that's got history background, and she's going to be in Ligon a lot, and we're going to be taking pictures and figuring out what we can save and use in the new school.
Okay, thank you.
After, I'll do the order that I'm going to stick with, so I'll go to you and then give her that.
So, the meeting went really well, and to the question that you raised, community members went up and put Post-it notes on, or little dots on a bunch of pictures, that kind of the design elements indoor design elements that they were looking at. And so they talked about bricks and all that, so that's very much on their mind, so that was at the meeting. To the point about the distance, I think at the meeting they pointed out that the way Ligon is currently, it's actually longer to get from one end to the other than what that would be. The last point is that, and staff and I talked about this already, was making sure the hallways are really wide enough where between the auditorium, the arts, and the library and classroom, it looks narrow up there. That's already on the minds of our staff, that we're going to have to widen that significantly because it's going to be a lot of people flowing through those areas. But there was a lot of positivity at the meeting, this last one as well as the first one. The community was really engaged in this entire process. For me, this, when we had the motion and the vote and capturing the auditorium entrance and the importance of it being on Haywood and there being that entrance there, I'm really happy with the direction that this is going in. And if you ever drive down MLK and you kind of look at the site, you can start to imagine it and see a big Ligon sign out there and how it connects to then Chavis Park, and it would look, I think it's going to look great. It's certainly what I'm supporting tonight.
Did you have something very briefly, Ms. Rice?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to assure the board that Ms. Carmen Coughlin, which is the daughter of, I know we mentioned it before, you've heard her speak, the daughter of our integrated board, Cliffonia,
Wimberley.
Thank you, Wimberley, is really helping with guiding when it concerns the historical pieces. So I just really wanted to highlight that that when Ms. Gordon was talking about making sure we preserve particular things, she is a historian within the city of Raleigh, very well respected and knowledgeable about it. And so I have strong confidence for me that gives me pause. And, you know, it's good when I pause, right? That Ms. Coffin is really aware of how this needs to look in references to reserving the historical pieces. I mean, she is the best historian that we have in this city around, and in the books that she's written, everything. So she is, you can't get any better than Carmen to understand the history of Raleigh. So I applaud our architectural firm for making sure that she's on board with this, so we should be confident in what it's going to look like.
And I'll second that.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So I think there was some request to figure out which schematic design or some guidance. Was that the original?
We'd like to request the ability to move ahead with Scheme A so that we can get going with schematic.
So I'm thumbs up or consensus around that? So it looks like you can move forward with the schematic design of Scheme A. So thank you
Thank you so
for
much.
the work that you all are doing to put this in and hearing the community voices and taking a situation that was 53, or that was built in 53 and rectifying that wrong. Because I think in the minutes that was pulled, the school, when it was built in 53, did not pass the inspection that that board put together, and they chose to move forward with it anyway. It's in the minutes. I've read the minutes from the 52nd and the 53rd when they were moving that. So I say at the table, this opportunity for us to, you know, rewrite the wrongs with history and giving Ligon a second chance and really reimagine for the next 70-plus years. So with that, I will adjourn our work session so we can convene next door promptly at 5:30 on the dot.
You heard that?
Yeah.